All right, good morning, everybody. It's your boy Akeem, and welcome to today's vlogs. Here to finally start things off with my draft grades for the 2016 NFL Draft. For today's vlogs, I'm going to talk about all of the divisions of the AFC Conference, and I'm going to start things off with the AFC East of this vlog. Starting with the Buffalo Bills, I think they did a pretty good job with their draft picks. Starting in the first round, they picked up Shaq Lawson, the defensive end coming out of Clemson. Now, with Mario Williams no longer with the team, they picked up a great player to try to work opposite of Jerry Hughes. Shaq Lawson was the AP ACC Defense Player of the Year for 2015. In the second round, they picked up Reggie Ragland, a great linebacker coming out of Alabama, and he was one of my top three inside linebackers entering this year's draft. He was a great pickup via trade from Chicago. In the third round, they picked up Adolphus Washington, a pretty decent defensive tackle coming out of the Ohio State, who registered 142 tackles during his career. In the fourth round, they finally picked up a quarterback in Cardale Jones, the teammate of Washington from Ohio State. Due to Cardale Jones' size, definitely caught the attention of many NFL draft scouts. And the Buffalo Bills decided to pick him up to be a decent backup to Tyrod Taylor. In the fifth round, they picked up Jonathan Williams, the running back out of Arkansas. A little bit of a head scratcher in this one. I think that Alex Collins was the better back between him and Williams. But I kind of understand the selection, but they did stack up with the running backs in their team. Let's not forget they already have LaShawn McCoy, the number one running back. And let's don't forget about Carlos Williams. He was a good, decent running back during this past season as a rookie. Next up in the sixth round, they finally picked up a wide receiver in Colby Listenby coming out of TCU, and rounding up with their final selection in Kevin Seymour out of USC, a decent cornerback. Now, in 2015, his numbers dropped. He did play in 11 games, but he only had one pass breakup and 24 tackles compared to 40-plus tackles in 2014. He had 13 pass breakups as well in 2014, but the numbers definitely dropped this past season. Now, the one position I thought they could have did a better job at is at wide receiver. I think they could have picked up a better wide receiver in the earlier rounds. I was a little bit disappointed because Sammy Watkins is desperate need of a good running mate, a tandem at wide receiver. I don't really think Colby Listenby is the guy that you want to answer to. And because of that, I have to give this team a B+. They had a solid defensive draft this past year's draft, but they didn't really pick up that wide receiver that they needed, and that's why I had to give them a B+. Had they picked up a better wide receiver, I would have gave them a solid A. Next up, the Miami Dolphins. They had a great selection with the first round, and pick number 13, and a good gem here, and Laramie Tunzel, who dropped many slots because of the marijuana case in which the video was linked of him smoking marijuana out of the mask. But I think this was an excellent pickup in the later in the first round. They finally try to address the offensive line. They still have Brandon Alpert, and Jawan James has not stepped up at the tackle position, which they did select him a couple of years ago. In the second round, they picked up a Xavier Howard out of Baylor, the cornerback. He was actually, mind you guys, the guy that I originally selected with the 13th pick for the Dolphins at cornerback. I think this guy has the length and the speed and the potential to become a star cornerback at the next level. And in the third round, they picked up a pretty underrated running back in Kenyon Drake coming out of Alabama. Now, he has been dealing with some injuries and some issues at running back in which he had to split many carries with other running backs, particularly Derrick Henry this past season. But Kenyon Drake is a deep threat. In his sophomore season, he did average 7.1 yards per carry. In the third round, sticking in the third round, they picked up a good wide receiver out of Rutgers and Leonte Carroll, who was in my top 10 entering this year's draft. And this team is stacked with a lot of young wide receivers, with Jarvis Landry being that number one guy for Ryan Tannehill, but he's looking for a good running mate, and they have a lot of great players. Devontae Parker needs to step it up. Kenny Stills, and with the selection of Leonte Carroll, they definitely have a good young receiving core with a lot of potential, but the players are just going to have to step it up and mature. In the sixth round, that was their next selection. They picked up another wide receiver, and Jakeem Grant, one of the leading targets for Patrick Mahoney out of Texas Tech. Like I said, they stacked things up with the wide receivers. And sticking in the 6th round, they picked up Jordan Lucas, the safety coming out of Penn State. A decent player, needs to work on his cover skills. In the 7th round, they picked up 2 good players in the 7th round, and quarterback Brandon Doughty, who's going to be fighting for the backup quarterback position for Ryan Tannehill. And rounding things off, a good wide receiver out of UCLA, and Thomas Durant, who can be used as a tight end, and I think he will be used as a tight end with him, Deion Sims, and Jordan Cameron at tight end for the Dolphins. I think they're pretty stacked at tight end, and I think that Durante has the opportunity to become the #1 guy at tight end. Overall, because of I think they had a good draft, I have to give them an A-. Next up, the Patriots from New England. I think they had a okay draft. They didn't really pick up the sexiest picks, but I do kind of understand what Coach Bill Belichick is doing. This is his first year as a GM. He did an okay job. He just didn't pick up the sexiest names that we're looking for, and I will explain. In the 2nd round, they didn't pick up the first. They didn't have a 1st round selection because it was actually rejected from them. So their first pick was in the 2nd round, and they picked up cornerback from Alabama, Cyrus Jones. Now he did pick up some impressive numbers during his career, but let's not forget he is coming from Alabama, and with a slew of talent that he has around him, I think he benefit a lot because of the talent that he had, particularly in the defensive line and the front 7. Next up, in the 3rd round, they picked up a guard coming out of NC State, and Joe Thuney, decent player. Next up, sticking in the 3rd round, they picked up his teammate at quarterback, Jacoby Brissett. It's going to be between him and Jimmy Garoppolo, who's going to be a starting backup for the backup quarterback position behind Tom Brady. And in the 3rd round, they picked up Vincent Valentine, the defensive tackle out of Nebraska. This was a major question mark for me, and I see the reason why they did pick him up, because he is a behemoth at 6'3", 229 pounds. But during his career, he only registered 76 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, and only 7 sacks. The numbers weren't impressive, but the size is, I kind of see, that's probably the reason why the Patriots did select him. Next up, in the 4th round, they picked up Malcolm Mitchell, the wide receiver out of Georgia, who's coming off of his best season yet, over 800 yards receiving. In the 6th round, they picked up Camus Grunger-Hill, the cornerback coming out of Eastern Illinois, who was actually 2-time first-team All-Ohio Valley Conference at linebacker at 220 pounds. Needs to bulk up, but they're going to try to convert him at cornerback. That was a big head scratcher to me, in my opinion. Next up, they did pick up a better linebacker in Elandon Roberts out of Houston. 142 tackles this past season with 19 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. Great performer, but he does run just a 4.8, 540. Needs to increase that speed. In the 6th round, they picked up Ted Karras, the guard coming out of Illinois. This actually has a good family tree of great players out of the Karras family to play in the National Football League. And rounding things up, a great selection in the 7th round, and Devin Lucien, the wide receiver out of Arizona State. I think this was a great pickup in that 7th round. Now, overall, like I said, they didn't really pick up the sexiest selections, but I still think they had a good ending with Devin Lucien, and I think that Cyrus Jones is a decent selection. I'm going to give them a solid C because they didn't really pick up the sexiest selections as far as the big names. But I think this team, I understand what the Patriots do. They don't really pick up like big names. They pick up names that will do well and build chemistry on the team. So we'll see how they will perform later on in their respective careers, but I'm going to have to give them a C with their efforts. Rounding things up is the New York Jets. With their 1st round selection, they picked up Darren Lee out of Ohio State. I think this was a pretty good selection at outside linebacker. Next up, they went with the quarterback in the 2nd round, and Christian Hackenberg coming out of Penn State. I think this was a pretty good selection to be the successor of Ryan Fitzpatrick. Next up is Jordan Jenkins, the 3rd round selection out of Georgia. He had a decent career as a Bulldog. Next up in the 4th round, Justin Barris, the cornerback coming out of NC State. He had 24 pass breakups with 165 tackles during his career. Decent numbers at cornerback. Next up, an offensive tackle out of South Carolina in the 5th round, and Brandon Shell. I think this was a decent selection, okay. And then rounded up in the 7th round, they picked up a punter out of Sam Houston State at LaShawn Edwards. Latchin Edwards, I don't really understand why they picked up that selection, but hey, they needed a punter. They went with the FCS guy. They could have went with an FBS selection, but they went with FCS. I understand that. And rounding things up is Sharon Peak, the 7th round selection, their final pick, the player out of Clemson, a wide receiver, who is coming off a 5th-year good year, over 800 yards this past season. Questioned in his entire career, one of the top recruits out of high school at wide receiver, but didn't really live up to the hype until his 5th-year senior season, in which he did have over 800 yards. Now, overall for the Jets, I'm going to give them a C+. I did like the Hackenberg and Lee pick, as well as I kind of like the Bears pick. He's not bad out of NC State, but we'll see what goes on with the cornerbacks. Now that wraps things up with the AFC East. The next I'm going to catch you guys will be the next video to talk about the AFC West Division. Thank you for watching this vlog. I'm your man, Keenan McCall. Be easy.